Hi, everyone. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpane.
Welcome to the Musical Innertube, the podcast born out of a mistake.
We once meant to introduce a soothing musical interlude, but we said soothing musical Innertube, and the name stuck.
On this podcast, we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives, jobs, hobbies, and passions.
Difference makers who really make a difference.
Dr. Clay Routledge is an existential psychologist. He's also a writer and a consultant. He spent 2 decades as a professor of psychology, professor of management, and distinguished professor of business. Clay is currently vice president of research and director of the Human Flourishing Lab at the Archbridge Institute. He's also co-editor of Profectus. It's a magazine on human progress and flourishing. He's published more than 100 academic papers, co-edited 3 books, and authored 3 books, the latest of which is titled Past Forward, How Nostalgia Can Help You Lead a More Meaningful Life. Welcome, Clay, to the Musical Innertube. Nice to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
What is an existential psychologist exactly?
So an existential psychologist is, a psychologist who is interested in the uniquely human capacities and motivation to answer the big questions. Why am I here? What purpose does my life serve? What happens to me after I die? Is there any meaning that transcends my mortal existence? Like the small stuff.
The stuff that racks my brain every day, right?
Right. So what we try to do is these are pretty broad, abstract philosophical questions, but we try to use the tools of modern behavioral science to explore them. So, for instance, a lot of existential psychologists are interested in what happens when people don't feel like their lives have meaning. How does that affect their mental health? How does it affect their productivity? How does it affect their creativity, their motivation in general? When people feel like their life is full of meaning, like what does that do for them? And so these kinds of things, and other people are interested in questions about like, what's it mean to believe or not believe in free will? Or, so what are these kind of implications? So that's really what it's about. Most of my work is focused broadly on the concept of meaning in life. Like, what does it mean to be an organism that's focused on making some kind of impact on the world, wanting to be a significant contributor to a meaningful cultural drama, and what are the implications of that?
And nostalgia, according to your new book and reams of research that you've been doing in the last few years, helps people achieve that goal of figuring out what their self-worth is and how it provokes them to get going and make their life meaningful in the future. And it's kind of weird to think of nostalgia as something that kicks you into the future, but you say that that's true.
Yeah, it's very weird. And, to be honest, I wouldn't have, when I first started doing this work, I would not have said that. What's neat about, right? What's neat about science is, if you do it correctly and with an open mind, it takes you down different paths of discovery, right? So when I first started this, really what I was thinking was, I was really more focused on thinking about the future. So we think about the future, and that's great. It allows us to have goals, to plan big projects, and that's important for success in life. It's important for the progress at the civilizational level, being able to think about the future. So I was really interested in that. But that ability comes with anxiety because the future is unknown, and so we can ruminate about all sorts of things that could happen to us, and then the inevitable that will happen to us isn't great. Which is our physical decline and death. So I was really interested in that, and then started thinking about, well, what happens perhaps when people think about the future and they worry about that? Maybe they turn to the past. Maybe they use that same ability to mentally time travel, but to go backwards as a way to kind of comfort them. So when I first started doing this, I thought, well, what's happening is we're kind of forced into the future, like we're moving forward, whether we want to or not. And that causes a certain amount of anxiety, and we look to the past for comfort. And so I thought, well, what we're doing is we're going back. Like nostalgia is really about seeking comfort in the past. But then along the way of doing this research, and not just me, like colleagues and other people around the world doing this work, there were a number of clues that started to turn our attention to thinking about nostalgia in a different way, in a more future-oriented way. So just as one example, we would collect nostalgic memories from people. We would ask people, okay, like spend a few minutes writing about an experience that makes you nostalgic and how that makes you feel to reflect on that experience. And we were surprised at the number of people that would, they would talk about a special memory from their life. And then they would say, like, bringing that memory to mind, like, makes me thankful. And I go, okay, so like people are appreciative of their meaningful memories. But then oftentimes would say, and it makes me feel hopeful for the future. And that was kind of our first clue. It's like, oh, so when people are looking backwards, that's kind of inspiring them to look forward with a certain type of like positive attitude. It's, seeing like the best possibilities of the future. So then, running with that, we really started to design studies to better capture that. Because up to that point, we weren't really looking at how does nostalgia make people think about the future. We were just looking at how does it make them feel right now when they're dealing with, stress, anxiety, and loneliness and things like that. So that's when we really started to try to measure like more future-oriented psychology and started to really discover like, wow, this is pretty amazing. People are, yes, nostalgia is about looking backwards. It's about, memories things that have already happened, experiences you've already had. But when people bring those experiences to mind, oftentimes they're trying to like figure out how to move forward in life, like what decisions to make, what goals to prioritize, what's most important, what inspires their creative spark, like how do they connect with the next generation? How do they make sense of a changing world and find a way to get on board with new ideas? And so that's when we really started to think about nostalgia as, wow, yes, it is about our memories, but it's using our memories to move forward with our life in a positive and constructive manner. Sort
of like a psychological safety net.
Yeah. I mean, that's, it's like we have this, another way to think about it too is it's like a savings account, right? Like you put memories in the bank because someday you might need them, and you might need to like extract some of those memories to help you make an investment in the future. And I kind of think of nostalgia as kind of being like a bank of meaningful memories that when it comes time to figure out what we want to do going forward, like we can draw on that.
I love this idea because, at least in my experience, the things I remember the most vividly are the really bad stuff. The things that never go away are the really bad mistakes that I made. I mean, you'll be, and everyone knows what I mean. I mean, I'm walking across the street and for no reason at all, I get an unbidden, involuntary memory of something I did that was really stupid. And I get that little, sort of ding, Well, what you're saying is that it doesn't have to be like that. We can realize that nostalgia, which is sort of this ache for home feeling, I mean, it's a way of banking up good memories, homey memories of contact, memories when things went well. Am I on the right track there?
Yeah, I think so. And you make an important point too about like, obviously we like lots of things from the past can haunt us, right? Mistakes we've made, regrets. God. Like, there's a bunch of fascinating work on regret. Nostalgia is almost
meeting John, for example.
Yes. I have made Don pay for years. I've made it pay. But no, seriously though, this is important because we remember mistakes for a really good evolutionary reason. If we never did, right, we'd never learn anything, right? I mean, it actually has a really good role. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah. And, and more broadly, I mean, you're hitting on something important that I think in the modern world, when we're encouraged so much to focus on being happy, we forget that negative emotions are like very valuable. It's just like physical pains, is important for survival. It warns us, right? Oh, that's, if you put your hand on the stove, it's good that hurts and you pull your hand back, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
If it didn't hurt, you would be in trouble. But negative emotions are important, right? But when we're coping with when we're dealing with negative emotions, we also want to find solutions, right? We want to if we pulled our hand back from the stove, we we want to put it under cold water. We want to stop. Okay, we got the message, but we want to stop the pain and move forward. And so the kind of other side of the coin of the negative memories and regrets is like, well, we also have these positive experiences, or even, and we can get into like, are they nostalgic memories? Don't have to be wholly positive, but they're meaningful experiences. That helps us. Just like we can say, oh, I wish I wouldn't have done X. We can think about a memory and be like, well, I'm glad I did this. And going forward, that helps me make that calculation of here's what I want to avoid doing.
Yes.
These are my regrets and I want to avoid. And here's what I want to move away from, but here's what I want to move towards, right? Like, so there's this balance between avoiding negative things and approaching positive things in our life. And nostalgia kind of helps us in that direction too. A good example is we've discovered that nostalgia is often triggered by loneliness. So when people lack social connection, they tend to think about past experiences that were socially fulfilling. And on the one hand, you could say, well, that's depressing because like if you lack social connection, like you shouldn't be sitting around and like thinking about the past. Like you should be going out and making and like actually having social connections in the present. But what we found is nostalgia helps you do that by reminding you of past social success. It kind of pulls you out of the moment and says, okay, like I moved to a new city, started a new job. I don't own one right now, but in the past, I've had rewarding social experiences, which gives me the confidence that even though things aren't great right now, like I do have the ability to form social relationships. And so nostalgia has this function of like pushing you towards people. So even though it's your own personal memories, it actually like pushes you towards like going out and interacting with people by giving you that social confidence. So another way to think about it is we've often described nostalgia as having like a self-regulatory function. When you're trying to figure out what to do or you're going through a distressing time, you don't just need to comfort yourself. You need to regulate your behavior and your goals in a way that actually solves that problem. And nostalgia can help you do that.
Yeah, your book points out that nostalgia, when it first was being studied, was confused with homesickness. And I think maybe by using the word nostalgia kind of brings up that whole, what you were talking about earlier about sitting back and thinking about the good old days and that sort of thing. And that ties it in with the homesickness. But actually, your research has shown that nostalgia is an actual psychological trigger that makes you go in one direction or another, using your memories as the key to that.
Yeah, nostalgia has this like motivational like capacity. So it's not just, so when we think of memory, we think of like cognition, right? Like you think of it almost as like a very cold, like of course, human memory doesn't work as a tape recorder, but people kind of think of that like memory is like, oh, you're bringing up these images of the past. Well, and then we think of emotion as like adding that level of like, the passion to it or interest to it. It's like, this is a positive memory, a negative memory, or whatever. And nostalgia has this like, it is a mix of emotion and cognition. But in addition to that, you're right. It also has this like motivational power. There's like a desire element to it. Like, you don't just think fondly about an experience from the past. You're like, oh, I would like to somehow reconnect with that. Now, that doesn't mean you want to. I think one of the things that people wrongly think is that people just want to relive the past. Well, if you actually like really interrogate people, they don't want to relive the past. There's aspects of the past that they would like to incorporate into the present, but as a concrete example, you've probably seen these surveys where like the majority of Americans say life was better 50 years ago or something like that. Now, that's a very broad question. And now if you go in and follow up and say, would you like to exchange today's medical advancements with medical options 50 years ago? Oh, no, of course not that. Would you, would you like to exchange like like our current attitudes towards race, like with 50 years ago? Oh, no, like we don't want to go back to that. So you start actually asking specific questions in areas in which we've clearly made progress, whether it's social progress or technological or scientific progress, and people get it. They don't want to give up the advances. But what they're saying is there's some sentiment that they feel like that some wisdom from the past that maybe we're not fully realizing. So, once you bring up those advancements, they'll say, well, we used to eat, my family used to eat dinner together and we didn't have these distractions of these cell phones or something like that.
Yes.
And so what they're saying is like, that's what they really mean is there's something special that they would like to they feel like if they could integrate that into all the advances, life would be even better. And you actually see this with young people too. We did this survey at the Archbridge Institute where I work. We did this survey looking at what all age groups think about like technological advances like artificial intelligence and automation and things like that, and also about like social media and cell phones. And what we found is the majority of Americans, and including young Americans and older Americans, actually are pretty open-minded and positive about like advances and things like artificial intelligence. We're a forward-looking society. We're curious. We're interested in new technologies and gadgets. But a lot of people did have concern about the direction that like social media and like especially like with cell phones and stuff were having on young people's mental health. Young people especially were concerned about that. They thought that their social media use was potentially harming their mental health. And then on top of that, they expressed a nostalgia. This was interesting because these were people who grew up with cell phones, and the majority of them expressed a nostalgia for a time before everyone was hyper-connected on cell phones. And so even young people who are very much digital natives had this nostalgic feeling for the past. And again, it wasn't that they wanted to give up. They weren't saying, I'd like to get rid of technology. They're saying, maybe there's a better way to use technology so I can get the benefits out of, like it's nice to be able to, it's nice to be able to call an Uber, to access an Uber on your phone or to look something up. But it'd also be nice if this wasn't such a distraction and I could pay more attention to people in real life. So I think, that's just one example of people using nostalgia not as a way to avoid the present or to avoid advances or to deny progress, but as a way to sort of integrate wisdom from the past, meaningful experiences of the past, in order to improve the progress we've made.
Let me ask you a question. First of all, you use a term in your book, human thriving, or at least the term thriving. And I've seen it a lot more in my reading in the last 10 years. And I would love to know how it is defined. How do you define human thriving? Because the reason I'm asking is that you talk about how nostalgia can help us achieve a thriving state. And I'd like to know about that.
Yeah. So terms like thriving really come, or at least the use in psychology, really come from a direction the field took a few decades ago and what's sometimes referred to as positive psychology. And the basic idea was that much of psychology is focused on what's wrong with people.
Yeah.
And it's, kind of like you think about, you go to the doctor when you get sick. You don't go to the doctor to say, hey, I'm doing great. Right. And so like psychology had kind of largely built on that biomedical model of medicine, of health, saying, well, people have depression or they have anxiety or people are prejudiced or, basically everything that's wrong with people. And then, a few decades ago, this movement came about. There's like, well, it's not just that living a full life isn't just about alleviating pain. It's not just about removing negative things. It's about reaching your full potential. You could say, I'm not depressed. I'm not anxious. I'm not suffering in any way. But that doesn't mean you're fully achieved your potential. Like you could grow more. So this idea of like growth, a growth state. And so you can think about that in a lot of ways. You could say, well, we have a lot of creative potential. Like I might be perfectly mentally healthy, but I could learn a new language. I could take on a new hobby. I could do things that really allow me to be more than just like baseline, just kind of neutral, like the absence of ill health, but have the presence of more like flourishing states. And so really that's what we mean by thriving. It's not just surviving, but and not just functioning, but really trying to achieve our full potential, which, I would also say, you could think of as like never actually achieved. The idea should be like, growth continues, like you're never done. There's always more to learn. You could always improve yourself in some ways. And so that's why I think about nostalgia is not just removing these negative states. It's helping you be more innovative, more curious, more creative, like more motivated, more driven, more charitable, more generous, more helpful, all these things.
Yeah. And there's a point in your book. You do talk about how nostalgia helps also make us a better community. And there's a point in your book where you talk about a gentleman named William Dunn who remembered how much he enjoyed fishing with his dad. So when he got involved with troubled youth, he took them fishing because he figured what worked for him would work for the other kids. And it seemingly did. It got them more involved in a group activity that wound up being beneficial for them. So it's an example that you give of how using your nostalgia helps you get out into the community and improve the situation, not just for yourself, but for everybody else in that community.
Yeah, no, I love that example because it's not just, like you said, it's not just, well, here's something that I cherish and that really helped me growing up. Not only did he go on to share it with like what started with one individual, then it really inspired him to scale it up, right? And to be like, well, I could build a whole like nonprofit organization out of this because there's lots of kids out there who could use a helping hand. And so, and a lot, if you talk to a lot of entrepreneurs or people who start some kind of movement or who are engaged in some sort of like charitable foundation or pro-social activity, oftentimes they do have some personal story of nostalgia, even if it's kind of a tragic or sad one. It might be somebody who said, I lost a parent to brain cancer, and this was a really deep, important relationship. I have all these fond memories, and that inspired me to, start this organization to increase research funding, for this particular disease. So oftentimes you'll see these like sparks of inspiration, even that seem on the surface to be based in tragedy, but are really based in, it's a tragedy because that was such an important relationship, right? And so there's a deeper love underneath that tragedy that inspires people. And so you will see these kinds of things where people have these nostalgic experiences and they drive them to create, to do something, to build, and that pushes them, that pushes them out of themselves. Like nostalgia makes you, if you're really excited about something, if nostalgia really excites you and energizes you, you don't want to keep it to yourself.
Yeah.
Right. You want to share it with others. So nostalgia does have, even at the like we're talking about like, some of the more like big, like pro-social examples, but even at the more, what seemingly superficial examples of like, I remember when I was younger, I went to a Star Trek convention and it was just so interesting because all these people who were there of all different ages, because they had this shared love for this like sci-fi franchise, and they didn't want to just keep it. They were hardcore fans, right? They didn't just want to sit at home and keep it to themselves. Like they wanted to connect with other people around this thing that they all loved. And, the older generations who grew up watching the original series loved it, that there were new series, that the traditions were continuing on and were like evolving in interesting ways, and being able to kind of swap those stories with the younger generation, that sense of continuity across generations. You see it with sports fans, you see it with all sorts of brands. And so, I bring up those examples because even things that seem like just like entertainment nostalgia, yes, often have this like deeper social and cultural component of, like you talked about community building and connecting and pushing people towards each other, which I just think is an important point because it's easy to think about something like nostalgia as a self-reflective activity, like, oh, you're just at home watching old movies or listening to old music by yourself. And you can certainly do that. There's certainly value in that kind of, just like reflection. But a lot of times nostalgia does more than that, right? Like it
yes,
pushes you out to find the other people that are also into that.
It's interesting because you touch upon the bad reputation that nostalgia has in certain sectors where people who are nostalgic are self-indulgent. They're stuck.
Right.
Nostalgia is connected with sentimentality, which I understand to mean overstressing the emotions, making too much of them. And also, finally, a kind of fondness where you remember things as being always better in the past, which is an error I think we always make. Of course, you've shown that once you ask people to be specific about, well, did you like the way you had to walk 10 miles to school back in 1930? They go, oh, no, I hated
both
that.
ways uphill. Right?
Yeah,
Both ways uphill. Well, it's but you've touched upon that. You've touched upon that about that notion, that we can, I don't know if I could say there's a danger to nostalgia, but there can be a habit of thinking in a particularly, perhaps too credulous way about the past, that has earned it a funny reputation. I'd love you to comment.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in anything that's good for you, people can overdo. Right. So it's not just, there, believe it or not, there are people that, exercise too much. Yeah.
Right.
Like you can actually hurt yourself exercising or drink too much water.
Yeah.
I mean, people can overindulge on a lot of things that in reasonable doses are pretty healthy. And nostalgia is no different in that way. I think part of its reputation, and this gets back to the point that Don made earlier about the history of nostalgia. I think part of its reputation is rooted in the difficulty in distinguishing things that are correlation from causation, if that makes sense. And so a lot of times what happens is people are dissatisfied with something and they're nostalgic. And then people think, well, it's the dissatisfaction, it's the nostalgia is making them dissatisfied because those two things are going together. When a lot of the times what's happening is it's the dissatisfaction that's making people nostalgic.
We'll return to the musical Innertube in just a moment, but first, this soothing musical interlude.
Clay Routledge is a highly cited researcher who has written dozens of articles for the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, USA Today, Newsweek, Fortune, and the Harvard Business Review.
He wrote the TED documentary short film, Why Do We Feel Nostalgia? And he's appeared on numerous TV and radio programs, including NBC's Today Show and NPR's Science Friday and Morning Edition.
Clay's work with the Human Flourishing Lab is part of the Archbridge Institute, a nonpartisan think tank studying the connection between human flourishing and progress in civilization. For more information about Clay, visit his website, Clay Routledge, that's ClayRoutledge.com, or check out Human Flourishing Lab, all one word, .org. And now, we return you to the musical Innertube, already in progress. I'd love to return to something you started talking about, Clay, about how nostalgia can actually help us get better at navigating a world that changes pretty fast, where things don't stay the same, where things, one thing that we are good at is doing something we've done before. One thing that existence is good at is throwing things at us that we haven't seen before, right? I mean, it's interesting. Right. I mean, we're both very well fitted, and the future's going to be the future. We always see things we haven't seen before. I'm wondering how nostalgia helps us navigate that fast-moving world.
Yeah. First, there's this concept in psychology called self-continuity, which is we do like stability at some level. Now, at the same time, and this varies by culture, but at the same time, we're easily bored, right? We like we like new things, we like stimulation, we like new ideas, we like new experiences. we're always looking for improvements. I mean, one of the curses we have is like as a species, it seems like we're never totally satisfied, which is the reason we keep making advances. So it's a blessing and a curse, right? We're never totally satisfied. We always want things to be a little bit better. But if the world changes too fast, if it feels chaotic, if it feels uncertain and we don't know, we can be paralyzed. It can be anxiety provoking. And so nostalgia has that function of kind of helping, like helping us feel like, okay, like things change. I want to grow as a person. I want my life to be one characterized by positive change, but I want to also feel like I'm the same person. At some level, like there's a stability of self. Like I'm not just changing moment to moment. I'm not the same person I used to be. Like there is some core to me that is stable. And nostalgia kind of helps us stay in contact with those self-defining experiences and kind of serves as a reminder, especially in times where like there is opportunities for exploration, adventure, like trying new things where we're not sure if we're going to like it. We're not sure if that's going to be the right path for us. And nostalgia can kind of help keep us, can help remind us of what our priorities are, what we really care about. Which can be good in these situations where we're trying to figure out what direction to take in life.
We've been talking most of the show here about how nostalgia helps move you forward and sort of an unexpected benefit of nostalgia. But let's go back and talk about people who are trapped and voluntarily, I would say, in the past, because there are whole movements on this whole MAGA movement in politics about how the country was better before and we need to go back to that and we need to stay there and we don't need any progress. People who are afraid enough of progress that they want to go backwards. They want to stop everything the way it is and not progress. What's the solution to that problem?
Yeah. So first I'd say, I think that is true. There are people like that. Again, I think even some of them aren't being totally honest. Maybe they think they are, but like if you started asking them specific things about what going back would mean, giving up,
yes,
they'd start to change their tune a little bit about certain things. But yeah, there is this phenomenon, especially in politics, but not just in politics, of what you could say like the weaponization of nostalgia. And the way I think it often works is how nostalgia works in general, which is, we've talked about how like if you're feeling anxious or uncertain or distressed in some way, you turn to nostalgia as a psychological resource. So a lot of times, if you'll notice what politicians do, if they want to like use nostalgia, is that they don't start with the nostalgia. They start by trying to scare you and tell you all the things that are wrong with society in the world.
Right.
Right. So they're like, oh yeah, this is why the present's no good, and the idea is to make you anxious. And then it's, I'm not saying that they know anything about the science of nostalgia. They just intuitively know how this works. Like you make people anxious, you make people distrustful of their fellow citizens. You make people, borderline paranoid in some of these instances. And then you say, okay, well, here's the solution. And so they're using nostalgia in that way as a resource, but more as a political resource, or like I said, even almost weaponizing it. And to be clear, or to have a positive note to this too. It's not always that. It's not always like that dark version of it. Like for instance, you'll see you'll see people being like activists for certain positive social changes. And they will often use as inspiration, like, here's the civil rights, like a historical nostalgia for like the civil rights movement, as an example. Of saying, here's a period of time in which these great civil rights leaders were inspiring us to be better. And so people on all sides of politics for all sorts of different purposes use nostalgia, not to say, oh, let's just go back to the past, but as a way to say there's something we don't like about the present. Maybe there's some inspiration in the past. One other example I'll give you that I think is especially neat because it's very much about the future is there's a movement that I'm somewhat involved with on human progress, and the idea is like trying to understand what advances civilization, whether it's technology, science, positive cultural change, human rights, things like that. In this movement, you'll often see a lot of people who are very skeptical of nostalgia because they think nostalgia is like anti-progress in a way. Like people who are nostalgic they should be spending their time focusing on building a better future, not about thinking about how great the past was, right? And so one of the things I've been trying to do within this space with these people say, well, that's not usually how like nostalgia works, and then point to how they use nostalgia. For example, like a lot of the people within the progress movement are very, very nostalgic at a time in which there was a lot more American optimism about they talk about how we used to like send people to space, and we used to have these big projects as a society, and there was a lot of national pride, and Americans were more entrepreneurial, and they will bring to mind themselves examples, periods of time in the post-World War II era of like the 1950s and 60s, where there was all this optimism about the future. They'll talk about shows like cartoons like the Jetsons. They'll talk about Star Trek coming out, like this idea of like a hopeful future. And then they'll talk about, well, that was followed by a time like in the 70s, maybe where things got there was more recession, and there was more of like a dark vibe to science fiction, and there was more of a pessimism. So even the people who tell us that, you shouldn't be nostalgic, it's bad for progress, themselves often use historical nostalgia as like an inspiration for like America used to believe in building things and doing things, and we can do that again. And so that's just to say, like, people can use that kind of political, historical nostalgia in lots of different ways. It can be used, in that more like fear-oriented way. But I think it can also be used in a very constructive way to inspire people to look back at like accomplishments in the past, major societal triumphs in the past that can, and I think this is especially good when people look at problems. Here we are, like the most abundant society in the history of the world, and people are like, oh, we can't get anything done. And you're like, well, people solved a lot of problems in periods of time they had a lot fewer resources available. Oh, yeah. There was a lot more. The world was at war. There was, a lot of people died of diseases. Childhood mortality was really high. Infant mortality was really high. And somehow people managed to, to find the inspiration and the courage and the like invention and innovation to like go forward and like build a better future. So we can do that too.
There are places in your book where you stop and you have a little highlighted area where you say, here's what you could do to trigger your own nostalgia. Write this down, look at this, and see how you feel about it. So sort of to sum things up, what are a couple of good tips for people to be able to use their nostalgia in a good way?
Yeah. No, I'm glad you asked. So I think we all naturally use, nostalgia is a natural human experience that we all use just sort of organically, so to speak. But I think it could be really good if you can find ways to really intentionally be nostalgic. And this actually connects to that last question about, concerns about like a sort of bad nostalgia or nostalgia having negative consequences. Like really, it's better to focus your mind intentionally on, well, here's a memory that's special to you, or here's something that you maybe think was better, or you really value from the past. Why? Like write about it, like write down what's the challenge you're going through. Why do you think this experience was helpful? So I think really interrogating the memory and trying to extract some wisdom and knowledge out of it is helpful. And moreover, I think that the more interactive nostalgia is, the better. So, listening to music is great. But if you can add a component to the nostalgic, like some type of activity, whether you're organizing a party and sharing that music with other people, hobbies such as cooking, quilting, collecting, things that like where you're really getting out there and engaging with materials and interacting with the world. And then finally, I'll just say like nostalgia pushes you towards other people. We want to share it. And so the more you can use your nostalgia, not just intentionally in your own reflection, but as a way to connect with other people. I think it's really powerful. Nostalgia is a great way to. It's almost like telling somebody a secret about yourself. Like, here's a nostalgic memory that's important to me. It's like you're revealing something, and that increases like your connection with somebody. It's a good icebreaker for people you don't know well, but it's also a really good way to deepen existing relationships. So I think the goal of those sorts of reflective tasks in the book was really to help, kind of help people think about there's all this great research on nostalgia, like scientific research on it, but ultimately this is something that people want to practically use. People really want the practical benefit. Why should I care about the science, right? It's interesting, but why should I care? Well, you care because there's ways that maybe you can enhance it in your own life, and that can, help you improve the experiences that you have going forward, which will help you build future nostalgic memories.
Well, Clay, I think in a couple of weeks, John and I will be sitting back saying, hey, remember that really good discussion we had with Clay Routledge about nostalgia?
I hope so. I hope this doesn't go in your column of regrets.
No, I don't think so. I think we'll be able to put that in a definite plus column, and I think everybody else will too. The book is called Past Forward, and it really is worth getting a hold of. We'll put a link to it on our website for people who really want to use their nostalgia to move forward and to see examples of other people who have. Clay, it's a fascinating topic, and we want to thank you for being on the Innertube today and talking with us about it.
Thanks so much for having me, Don and John. It's been a great conversation.
So much fun.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Hey, let us know how we're doing. Send us an email at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
Do you know someone with a great story to tell? Let us know. Send us an email or log in to our website, musicalinnertube.com, and click on the microphone in the lower right-hand corner to leave us a voicemail.
And while you're on our website, take a few minutes to listen to past episodes of the podcast. They're all there, along with pictures and biographies of our guests, blog posts, and lots more.
And as always, our thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for providing us with our theme music.